I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he has ordered his troops not to storm the Azov-style steelwork plant in Mariupol, the last bastion of Ukrainian resistance in the besieged port city. During a meeting at the Kremlin, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu told Putin that Mariupol had been quote-unquote liberated, but that thousands of Ukrainian troops remained holed up in its tunnels and basements below the steelworks. Russia is thought to have suffered significant losses in and around that facility as Ukrainian forces hold the strategic advantage in the network of underground passageways. Russia's leader described a plan to seize the plant as impractical and instead called on his forces to blockade the area.
I consider the proposed storming of the industrial area pointless. I order to abort it. This is the case when we must think. That is, we must always think, but even more so in this case, about preserving the life and health of our soldiers and officers. There is no need to climb into these catacombs and crawl underground through these industrial facilities. Block off this industrial area so that not even a fly comes through.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials have called for the opening of more humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians still trapped inside Mariupol. Another 3 buses of evacuees from the port city arrived in Zaporizhia today, after 4 buses did manage to leave on Wednesday with around 80 people. But more than 100,000 people still remain, and they're believed to have little or no food, water or medicines. It comes as the latest figures from the UN Refugee Agency says that more than 600,000 additional people have been internally displaced since Sunday alone, totaling 7.7 million since the beginning of the invasion. Well, with me here in the studio, bringing us up to date as ever with the latest developments, is our correspondent Sasha Vakolina. Sasha, we heard that order from the Russian President Vladimir Putin saying don't storm the Azov steel plant, but instead essentially blockade it. So for the people still holed up there, for the people on the ground, what does this mean in practical terms now?
They mean that they're as besieged as they were before. And when Vladimir Putin said not to storm Azovstal, he responded also to the comments from his defense minister, who said that it would still take several more days for the Russians to defeat the Ukrainians fighting at the steelworks. Not storming Azovstal now and blockading it as it is now, but it's not about being pointless or impractical. Russian forces have been trying to defeat Ukrainian fighters there for weeks, ever since they took over Mariupol, which was early March. It's been weeks and weeks. Kyiv and Western analysts, they say that's because what we see now, the statements from Moscow follow the fact that they could not take over Azovstal by force. This is why they're trying to blockade it now, to block everybody who is inside. We do know about those tunnels and the basements and the shelters on the Azovstal. Not only fighters are there, there are civilians, as you said, there are children, there are elderly people there, and also not storming Azovstal does not mean not shelling it. There's been heavy shelling here this afternoon, according to the administration of Mariupol, with up to 80 people who managed to evacuate yesterday, over 120,000. This is the latest information by Zelensky. Civilians are still in Mariupol, and as they're staying there, they're not going to have any possibility now to evacuate. They can't even try to break through evacuation corridors with their own vehicles, with their own cars. And on top of that, Moscow and pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine said that they do plan to have a Victory Day parade in Mariupol on the 9th of May. This is the city that saw some of the heaviest fighting, the city where more than 95% of everything, all buildings, now destroyed.
And we still don't even know the full extent of the damage actually in Mariupol, because obviously people haven't necessarily been able to get inside. Meanwhile, in the rest of the country, specifically in the east, fighting continues there. We heard some comments from the governor of Luhansk, who said that around 80% of that region is now in Russian hands. And when you hear that, that really does sound like a very rapid Russian advance. But of course, some of that ground was already controlled, as I understand it, due to the war there for the past 8 years.
That's it. Some of that territory was already under the control of pro-Russian separatists since 2014, since that invasion, the beginning. And as of now, we do know that Russians do continue their offensive operations, claiming some suburbs of Severodonetsk. These are not big cities, these are not big towns. Yes, they try to advance further into the territory, but they can't really now make a major advances there in the east. Another place where there's been really struggling under very heavy bombardment is Kharkiv. That's northeast of Ukraine. Now Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, has been under non-stop bombardment with all systems and the civilians just trying to stay in shelter.
We also know that US President Joe Biden, he's just announced another military package. I think he's put around $800 million worth of weapons on the table for Ukraine. What is inside it? Is it what Zelensky was asking for?
Well, let's see, there are two significant things here. First of all, is because this is a continued support by the United States of America. This is the second time he's announcing it within just days or weeks, right? And then secondly, this is very significant because there is some heavy weaponry in that aid package. We do know there will be some howitzers, artillery rounds, tactical vehicles, tactical drones. So this is exactly the weaponry that Zelensky has been asking for from his Western allies. Why? Because he said, look, for example, for places like Mariupol, there are two ways of unblocking them. One is the negotiating, diplomacy, and we've seen that this did not work until now. And the other one is heavy fighting. And for this heavy fighting, there are Ukrainian soldiers, there are forces, but they do need heavy weapons they can fight with.